Hi everyone, my name is Dylan and I am here for Wintergreen Art Center's July 1st Friday, and so I'm going to be doing a video. And the reason why I'm doing a video is mostly in part because of COVID, but I'm taking this opportunity to also explore something that I've always kind of wanted to do, which is give the people that view my art a more in-depth explanation for how I got to the finished piece that they're looking at, because I always find that way more interesting to talk about the problem solving that I had to do to design the plaster mold that I'll talk about later, or figuring out how I was going to fire the pieces, understanding glazes, understanding how clay transforms from a soft, pliable material to a hard structure. Just all of this tying together an all-encompassing knowledge to develop this piece that someone will be looking at, that you will be looking at. And so, yeah, let's get started. Something that I thought could be interesting is the explanation from start to finish of my creamer. So here I have the material I use. It's an antique white porcelain slip, clay milkshake, more or less. And I pour it inside a plaster mold. So I currently have one that I casted yesterday, or that I had cast yesterday, and I'll be demolding that soon for you guys. But here, right here, I have one that I had taken out of the mold and I had cleaned it up, but it hasn't been fired yet, so it's actually quite fragile. So as you guys can see, I thought it would be interesting to show you guys that it's still pretty fragile. Then we go on to bisque firing. Now, this changes the chemical composition of the clay. The molecules get heated up and they contract into each other, so it makes the material stronger. And so as you can hear, it's still fragile-ish, but it's a lot stronger than just right out of the mold and then just dried. Very fragile, still kind of fragile, but pretty good. And then we have the glaze and final firing, which it's kind of the process. It's called vitrification, which is when the molecules get as densely packed as they possibly can. So this is not going to break. I had designed this a couple years back. It wasn't designed, or it wasn't made to be an actual product. It wasn't originally made out of clay. It was actually made out of like a resin model making foam, because it was just supposed to be a form exploration, so it wasn't supposed to be turned into a real product. But reflecting back and coming back from school, essentially I just wanted to see if I could make it into a real thing. I thought I had enough of a foundation for the design process and building techniques to kind of figure out how I was going to do this. And so I'll get into that as well. And so the whole ceramics process is rather new to me. I've been manufacturing pieces for about 6 months now. It's been about a year and a half in the making. So pretty much a year of this whole timeline has just been preparation. All right, so now I'm just going to demold the creamer that's kind of been sitting in there for like a day now. Typically I don't let it sit there for more than a day. Well, actually this one's been fairly long. I'm waiting to be taken out. So the way that my mold works is I pour the liquid clay inside this mold, right at this opening. The mold makes a negative impression of the piece itself. So when I pour the clay in, it fills all the way up. And then what's really neat about plaster is it's rather porous. And so it absorbs the moisture from the clay, from the clay slip, and it solidifies a surface on the mold. Nice. One thing that I had needed to figure out was when I made this piece. So here is the master positive, or the piece that I had made for the actual like mold making process. So I used this to cast the plaster around its surfaces. And one thing that I kind of ran into was this negative space that I had designed in as the handle resulted in quite a bit of drag. Using my existing 3 mold piece and just filling in a bit of material before I poured the slip in, so that's why this is discolored. And what this clay does is it preemptively fills in those seam lines, those kind of areas of slop in the mold where I just wasn't skilled enough to get it as sharp as it should have been. When I put these 2 pieces together, there is quite a bit of spacing between this mold piece and this mold piece, and I used the clay to fill in this area and smooth it out. I just wasn't able to get it with a 3-part mold. I should have done, I should have divided the mold into more pieces, but that was way more complex than I was willing to put in just in the like initial stage of designing the creamer and seeing if I can even make it a product. So by filling this in with clay preemptively, and what you can see is how that little bit of clay keeps that wall thickness the same or consistent throughout, because if the clay wasn't filled in right there, the slip would have filled in and there would have been a little divot on the interior surface, which would have caused a weak spot. And I had this issue with a couple of my casts where it was so thin from the material just filling up that spot and not actually building up a strong like wall surface, that when I took the top mold off, it just ripped. And so it was very frustrating, and it took me a bit of time to figure that out, and that was, you know, figuring out that that was the problem. This is actually this is the second mold that I made of this creamer, and my second plaster mold ever. So I think I did pretty good starting out with a 3-part mold. They can get quite complicated, so I'm pretty proud of that. But as you can see, there's a bit of excess material in the seam lines. It's called flashing. So it's just excess material that's wedged itself between the 2 mold surfaces. So from this main surface to the block here and the block here and the block there were these seam lines, and they weren't perfectly flat up against each other. They had a little bit of a split between them. And so when I poured the material in, obviously it filled in those gaps as well. It's not that hard to take care of.